Hey everybody, welcome back to John's Chess Channel. I haven't done one of these in a very long time. All right, so in this game, I played a Chessmaster personality called TC. And first of all, let's talk about chess personalities, chess programs, computers, and all that. They play very weird, okay? So if you play a program, it's not going to be like you're playing a regular human, okay? Don't expect it to be. So first of all, a few differences with them. The chess programs usually have really good book knowledge. Okay, so they may be programmed to know certain book moves. And for people who are unfamiliar with book are like just opening moves that all the masters and experienced players play. It gives you the best chances of winning. There are all sorts of different book openings and the best ways to open to guarantee you a better chance at the mid game, the end game, and obviously winning. Okay, so that's called book. Okay, a lot of people memorize some opening moves, and then the game's very exponential, so you could only memorize so much, right? But anyway, the computers have very strong book knowledge, and you know then in the middle game, they might do a selective blunder, to sort of make the game more fair. So they'll play really strong in the beginning, might make a stupid blunder like just give up a rook for a pawn or something like that, right? And then after that, they'll play like masters for the rest of the game, pretty much, right? Or they'll always see a forced checkmate. Okay, so it's not going to be the same as a human. Also, some other differences like humans, we miscalculate when we make errors. Okay, we just may not have seen something or we calculated wrong. A computer can't really miscalculate, so they're going to make those intentional dumb moves that humans wouldn't make, right? Just sacrifices for no reason. Okay. Also, computers, they don't really feel like pressure on their king side like that. Like, as a human, you might have your king side might be open up after you castle, or they have a lot of pieces attacking your king side and stuff, and you start to get nervous. Obviously, the computer's not going to be nervous, right? It knows whether there's a checkmate there or not. So, king side pressure doesn't really bother it. They don't miss things like fianchettos or bishops that are sort of hiding in the corners because, again, they miscalculate. They don't overlook things. It's a computer, okay? Anyway, this is TC. Me and TC got a little bit of a history back in the day, way back in the day when I was in high school. I used to play this guy all the time, and he used to see everything, and he was like impossible to beat, and I'd be like struggling to beat this guy, right? But anyway, I was able to beat him this time, and kind of like a victory. When you got something you always wanted to get done, and it's like, yes, I finally got to do this. And I'd be working my way up the Chessmaster ladder to see who's the strongest person I could beat, and I'd always get stuck on this guy, but I whooped him this time. So now let's move on to like Josh Waitzkin H12 or something, right? Anyway, let's look at the game. So I'm white, TC is black, okay? I start off with the king pawn opening e4, my favorite opening. Some of you may know it's one of the probably the top opening. You control the center, make space for your bishop and all that. He does c5, the Sicilian defense, which is probably one of the most common responses for black if someone plays e4, okay? I develop my knight, king's knight variation of the Sicilian defense. He pushes his pawn to e6. See, this is book. These are opening moves, right? These are the moves that they say you should make if your opponent does certain moves. So TC plays e6, okay, the Paulson variation. I do d4. He takes. I take, all right? He moves his bishop to b4, which is, I think book ends there, I think. And I block it with my bishop, okay? So what's happening now, either he trades and then he loses that sort of control of the center with that bishop, or I'll take that bishop from him, right? And then I'll have control either way, right? So he decides to take, and I take with my queen, all right? I think I could have taken with my knight, but I kind of wanted my knight a little more active toward the middle, so I want to move it to c3, right, as opposed to over there, okay? As you can see, I'm kind of controlling the center. He has like one pawn. He has no pieces developed. I have a knight. I have my queen up. Move the bishop out the way. I'll be ready to castle. So he moves his knight there. I move my knight to c3. He does knight f6, and I do knight c3. Then he pushes his pawn to d6. I move my bishop to e2, okay? Just moving it out the way so that I can make way for the castle. My personal style, I like to have my pieces, my king castled and safe before I attack. I'm an attacker, but I like to make sure everything's good. I won't get attacked, I'm safe, and then I start with the attacking. That's how I play personally. He castles, I castle back. He pushes his pawn to e5, attacking my knight. So I have to move my knight. I move it to f3. He develops his knight to c6. I move my pawn to a3 over here. Okay, I just don't want to bring in the knight down here or whatever, you know, getting, you know, in my area. So I do this. Okay, this square over here is open, but you know, my knight can always take, which I think happens later on. He moves his bishop to g4, essentially trying to pin my knight, but that's okay. I got a bishop behind that knight, okay? So it's not really pinned because bishops are the same value. So I'm free to move my knight whenever I want, right? As opposed to if I had a queen there or something, right? Then I can move the knight. So I push the pawn to h3. I'm like, we doing this or what, right? He captures, I capture, okay? This is where we are now. Now he moves this knight over here, right? Kind of bringing trouble my way. And I move the rook over here to d1, okay? I think I just wanted kind of control of this file right here. If he moves the knight and then I capture back, I could kind of take this pawn, right? He moves his pawn to a6 for whatever reason. I don't know. I guess he didn't want me to move my knight here after he captured and then have a third piece attacking that pawn. I don't know. I move my rook to e1, okay? More center control, okay? He moves his rook to c8. I move my rook over here to c1 because, you know, I notice there's a lot of pressure on this pawn. Like if I move this knight, right? Both a rook and a knight are attacking the pawn, right? I just wanted a little more backup. He takes my bishop on f3. I take his knight right back with my pawn. Now he moves his queen over here. Right now, thing about me, I like a neat pawn structure. Usually when your pawn structure is better, you know, it's a little better for you, okay? You're not supposed to really have isolated pawns over here that have no protection. You know, my king side's open up, and he has his queen over there, right? Now this is looking kind of dangerous for me, especially with the knight there. Usually when I'm playing speed chess, that really scares me because, like, you know, the knight could come over here, then start doing all this kind of fancy stuff, and before you know it, you're about to get checkmated. And I don't like that, you know? All up in your grill, right? So I move my king over here to g2, protecting this pawn over here, all right? Of course, he moves his knight over there, right? Probably planning to go here next, put me in check. I put this rook over here, right? If anything, he chases my king away. It'll still have protection. Or matter of fact, if he does this, it'll be a double attack on this pawn, right? Okay, so I want to have added protection, security. He moves his rook to c5 for whatever reason. I move my queen over here to g5. Okay, so it's more powerful over here. I'm forcing the knight to move, and worst case scenario, I could come over here, fight with the queen, try to undouble up this pawn over here, etc. Right? So he moves the knight to f6, and I move the rook to d1. Okay, I'm pinning this pawn over here, right? Even though my queen can't quite take this right now because there's a rook defending it, but It's good to get pieces lined up with your opponent's queen or king. He moves his queen to e6, trying to unpin it, right? I move my queen over here to f5. I'm like, let's trade, especially when there's dangerous situations like that. Sometimes you just want the queen off the board, right? Especially if you're playing from a defensive position. All right. He moves his queen away. That's fine. Now I'm starting to play aggressive now, right? Now I'm pushing this pawn up. Okay. I don't have as much pressure anymore. Now I could attack. Okay. He moves his queen to e6. And I push that pawn again, right? If he wants to trade, he'll initiate it. He takes, I take. Now look at that. I'm tripled up. All right. If anybody's a beginner or novice, you don't really want to be tripled up. You don't even want to be doubled up, right? Because now look, this guy could only move one square. This guy can't move at all. It's a mess. He pushes his pawn to d5. So this guy's kind of a strong player, as you can see. I move my pawn to h6. He moves his pawn to d4, right? Attacking my knight. I take his pawn, okay? And now that's like what they call in between move, I think, zugzwang, whatever. Basically, he can't take my knight now because now he's in trouble, right, with his rook. Okay, if I messed up the terminology, forgive me, but he has to like protect his rook now. Okay, so my knight has a little chance. He takes the pawn. Now I move my knight to e4, attacking his rook and his knight. He captures. I capture. Look at that. I undoubled up, right? Untripled up. I'm still doubled up. He moves his king to h8. And I move my rook to d2. I don't like missing pawns. Every pawn makes a difference when you're playing chess, all right? Every little piece. That's another potential queen. So I'm saving this guy. At least I'm going to try to. He moves his rook to g8, puts me in check. I move my king to f1. Now, maybe that was a bad move. Maybe it'd be better off if I moved my king here on f3 so that I could get the other rook over here to defend the pawn, right? Because now the king is kind of blocking this path, and he's not going to be able to save that pawn in time, right? If he decides to double up, which I think he does. Sure enough, he does that. Okay. And I move my king to e2. He captures on c2, okay? Now, you never really want a rook on your pawn's rank, which would be the rank 2 and rank 7, right? For black. You never want a rook here. They call it I think they call it pig. At least Josh Waitzkin did, because it could just eat up all the pawns like a pig, right? From here, because the pawns are usually in a line, okay? Luckily, I have my rook here, so if he tries to do that, my rook would take him right back, right? Okay, so I leave the rook there. I don't want to capture, because if I capture, let me show you guys, I'm going to have to restart the game, but if I capture, he's going to take, and look at that. My king's under check, he's going to take this pawn, and then it's a world of a mess for me, all right? Let me set it back up real quick. Give me a second. There we go. So I never took it back. He moves his rook to c7. And I move this pawn over here to f6. I basically wanted to stop his king from getting here. So his king's kind of trapped. He could only move to one square, right? He moves his rook back down to c2 for whatever reason. And I move my rook over to h5. I'm attacking this pawn on e5 over here. You see it? And he can't. Now, this rook's kind of pinned too, right? Because this rook has to protect this rook. So if he's like, ooh, let me try to protect this guy, he can't really do that. Even if he wants to move here to protect this pawn, right? He can't protect both of them, okay? I could take one or the other. So he decides to move the pawn to d3 for whatever reason. I can't take it with the rook because the rook's pinned, but I could gladly take it with the king, right? Which I do. He takes it with his rook. I take it with my king. All right, now we got a game going on, okay? He doesn't try to protect that e5 pawn for whatever reason. Like I said, computers play weird. I think if it was a human being, they would try to. But I decided to take the pawn, okay? I'm going to take what you give me. Now I got a passed pawn. I got center control. I got one less threat. It only takes one pawn to get to the other side to beat you, right, guys? So he pushes the pawn to b4. I push my pawn to a4. He moves his rook to d8. I move my rook to d5, all right? If he takes, I'm winning. I'm pushing this pawn over here. I'm going to eat up all these pawns over here. Beep, 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 right? And then it's game, but he's not going to do that, right? He moves his rook to g8. I move my rook to a5. He puts me in check. On d8, I move my king to e3. Now he's attacking this pawn over here on d6. I simply push my pawn to e5. I love moves like this, where not only are you protecting a piece, you're attacking another piece, right? So I do that. He decides to attack this pawn on e6. I push my pawn to f4, defending it, okay? See, so it's not so bad to be doubled up in this position, because look, I got a little bit of a chain over here, right? Protecting each other. Obviously, it'd be better if I had this and I could do all this stuff right here, right? But this is fine for now, okay? He moves his rook to c6. And I advance my king. I move it over here to d4. I don't want him putting me in check or anything like that, or coming down. I don't know. I just wanted to advance it, right? He moves his king to g8. And I move my king to d5. He has to move back to c8. And maybe I should have taken this pawn over here, right? Either case, I advance this pawn on f5, okay? I guess I didn't really want him coming down here and harassing that pawn. But like I said, maybe I should have just took this pawn over here. He pushes his pawn to h5. And now I need to chase it, right? Because he has a passed pawn over there. Moves his pawn to h4. I'm chasing it. h3, g3, king to g3. He moves his rook over to c6. And I take the pawn, all right? I just wanted that threat out of my hair. Now, I'm pretty much crushing him. He has 2 pawns, and I have 5 pawns, and 3 of my pawns are like close to the edge, okay, where I could advance it and get a queen. So he moves his king over to f8. I start to bring my king back over, king g3. Moves his king to e8. I move my king to f4. And he puts me in check with his rook at c4. I move my king to e3. He moves his rook to c6. We're back at square one. I move my king to d4. He pushes the pawn to b3. And I move my rook to c5. You want to trade? Let's do it. Nope. He moves his rook over to b6. I move my king over to c4. He moves his rook over to b8. And I push my rook to c6, attacking that pawn on a6. He moves his king in to d7. And I take the pawn on a6. He puts his rook to c8, putting me in check. Bam, I capture his pawn on b3. Okay, now I have 5 pawns and he has like nothing. Okay, he's in trouble now. He moves his king to c7. And I push my pawn to a5. He moves his king to b6. And I put him in check with my rook on b6. All right, and that's probably why I did that, because now he can't touch my rook. He moves his king back to c7. And now I advance my pawn to e6. He decides to move his rook to f8. Okay. And sometimes the best thing is not to take, but to push, advance, right? I move my pawn to e7, one square away from queen. He decides to move his rook to a8. All right. Now, he's attacking this pawn, but that's not really a threat, right? Because if he's an idiot and decides to take it, I'm just going to promote to a queen, right? For whatever reason, I move my king to a4. He moves his rook back to e8, blocking that advancement. Now I'm just advancing on the other side, right? You can't be everywhere at once. This rook over here is overworked. I move my pawn to b4. He moves his rook to h8. I move my king to b5. He moves his rook to g8. All right, now I'm going to advance this guy. I move my pawn to a6. He moves his rook to a8. I push that pawn over to a7. All right, it's hanging, but like I said, you leave that 8 rank, I'm getting a queen with that e pawn. He decides to take it, be my guest. I promote to a queen. Can't do nothing about it, right? He puts me in check on a5. Should I take it? Should I take it? No, this was a trap. If I take it, it will be stalemate. By the way, one thing computers are really good at is that, seeing like stalemate and stuff, right? So, you know, I was kind of tempted to take it, but his king would have no legal moves and it would be a draw. I worked way too hard to throw it away on one move with a draw, right? No, I'm winning this. I'm doing way better than him. So what do I have to do? I run away with my king to c4. He moves his rook to c5, again tempting me with the stalemate. No, sir. I move my king to b3. Okay. Now he takes my rook. Okay, that threat of stalemate isn't there anymore. I take his rook with my pawn on b4 to c5. Right. He's in check. Takes my pawn. All right. This is pretty much my game now. I bring my queen down to e5, and he's forced to move back, right? He moves back to c6. Bring the king in. He moves back to b6. I move my queen to c5. He moves over to b7. I move my king to b5. He moves to the last rank, 8, and I block off his path. I move my queen to e7, okay? He moves his king over to a8. I move my king to b6. He moves his king over to b8. And I have checkmate now, right? I have checkmate different ways. I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, or I could do this, right? Which is ultimately what I end up doing. And bam, checkmate, okay? 80 moves, that's kind of a long game, but it was slow and steady death for him, right? I ended up winning. That's what matters, okay? And yeah, this is how you beat TC on the Chessmaster program, okay? Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to see me play anyone, or if you want to play me or anything like that, just let me know, all right? All right, until next time.